like this, man. He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down in the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's like all the time.
All right, Berto, welcome back to the J.Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Thank you for having me on, Jay. I'm excited to talk to you today about a thing that really concerns the both of us. It's a very important adaptation we may have to make as podcasters.
Yeah, well, it's funny, right? Because you self-described newsman and me, self-described newsman, are in a very uncomfortable situation that the news is really boring and everything sucks, and not in a like it's so over, kind of way, but just like everything is fake, nothing is fun to talk about anymore, and it's just like the only news being produced is nonsense reacting to nonsense. And maybe that's always been true, but at least when it was like Joe Biden's brain dripping out of its ears, that was kind of funny. Whereas this is just like pure desert of the real. Like nothing happens.
Yeah. So just kind of set the stage here. This is something I'm sure we noticed around the same time. And like you had mentioned, well, you are a self-described newsman. I'm a widely described news. I like to call myself a widely described newsman. I had people coming to me going, there's so much news. Things are happening again. Now, I'll say this much. Things are happening. We are no longer a Nothing Ever Happens show on my show, not for the reasons that it was the case before, but because we wanted to give the timeline a chance. We are coping when we say this, but not in a negative or delusional way. We know what our intention is. We're hoping and we're coping for the best. So things are happening. Now, if somebody asks me, what is happening? I'd have to take a while to give you an answer, but I'm sure I could come up with something that's happening.
Well, I think that the other part of it is that so many of the stories that come across your desk as a podcaster, right, an essential worker, the backbone of the American economy, just don't matter, right? Like everything will be presented as if the sky is falling, and then not 3 hours later, it's all gone. Nothing matters anymore. Like, do you remember when
difficult to do a weekly show because of exactly that problem. The interesting thing is when you're doing a weekly show like TLE is, you're really not doing a weekly show. You're doing a show about what the 2 previous days were about. And given that we record on Monday for a Wednesday release, we're by Wednesday, the news that people are getting is 2 or 3 days forgotten.
Well, like I was even thinking about this. Do you remember when Donald Trump was causing planes to fall out of the sky several weeks ago?
Very briefly, I do, yes.
Yeah.
That just stopped.
And then it was Donald Trump was killing people with AIDS.
Yes, I remember that.
The point is, right, like, look, like the whole TDS thing seems to be eternal, but
yeah,
it's sort of like it's worn off for all but the most mentally unwell internet denizens. And it seems like the broad response has been just kind of an like it seems like most people are kind of checked out, which to be honest is probably healthier.
Well, right. Let me stop you here. Something that I've been thinking about, and now I want to pitch it to you and see how you react to it. I think TDS is more prominent than ever, but not
I think it's
Trump
EDS now.
Well, not Trump derangement syndrome, but Trump depression syndrome seems to be very, very popular now.
Yep.
And it's afflicting people on the left and on the right.
Yep. You're 100% right. There's also another level of it, which it kind of seems like Trump is to a certain degree kind of old hat. and no one has had a new thought about the man in 8 years. And the new kind of totem, to use a neutral term, right? The new shibboleth of hatred is Elon Musk. And that's still funny. Because look, I don't particularly care about Elon Musk. I was never a Reddit type individual. I never loved him. I've always just thought of him as how's that for a euphemism? If you post to YouTube, you become incredibly adept at very wordy ways to say derogatory things.
Noticed.
In a way that
I've
AI
noticed.
can't pick up on. For instance, you'll hear references to a certain ethno-sectarian group. By of course I mean the Amish. But point is,
what were we calling them the other day? What were they? The Lebanese? I forget what group we were.
The Qataris. That's what it was.
The Qataris, yeah.
Freaked out about Qatari influence in our government. But point is, right? Like Elon has become this figure of rage. And again, I don't particularly like Elon Musk. I still view him as both autistic and vaguely sinister.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, like, the reaction to Elon has been absolutely hilarious. Like the ongoing just chimp out of minor vandalism to Teslas has been a bright spot in an otherwise very boring couple of weeks for news.
I think that Elon is doing the most out of anybody in the administration to keep the news interesting. I don't even necessarily think that he's doing this as a favor to us, but the only
I think it's
novel...
I think he's staying up late at night saying, how can I make Berto's life better?
Oh, okay. Well, that's very sweet. He could send me $1 million. That would make it really easy.
Well, he can do that, but he will have to impregnate you. So be aware of the consequences.
That's fair. I'm certainly sure I could take care of a child for cheaper than he's paying other people to do the same job. I'm sure of it. I'm sure of that. I mean,
well, really, we need free trade for Elon's bastards, right? Like why do we have to do this? Because there's already been the alleged idea that he isn't physically fathering these children, right? So why not just?
Can I plug my show as a segue to that on Wednesday? I don't know when this is coming out, but Wednesday.
Also on Wednesday.
Okay, good. So after you're done listening to this, go over to Timeline Earth. Just search Timeline Earth. We will show up anywhere that you can find podcasts. Part of our discussion, ongoing discussion, and Jay, you may have to edit this part. So just keep this in mind. So, well, I hope I don't get this. I hope I don't get you thrown off YouTube, but I'll do the long story short here. We've been talking for weeks about whether or not Elon Musk has sex. Now, you think I say that and you go, you really are scraping the bottom of the barrel. And that might be true, but it's the only interesting thing to talk about. And of course, the latest development in the question of whether or not Elon Musk has physical sex relates to the latest drama that's going on between him and Ashley St. Clair. The drama going on between them is about the paternity of the child that she has, which she claims is his. This is not the
Wait, Bird, are you still there?
Monetized, but it's unfair to get another person demonetized. The long story short is we have been developing theories.
This is not a joke. Your connection just cut out right as you were about to say whatever you were going to say.
Oh, no.
So I think we just don't let the viewers know. Whatever you were going to say, I don't know.
Fair enough.
They can watch TLE. Fuck them.
Yes, go and do that. Go and watch TLE. You'll get the scoop on whether or not we think he has physical sex.
That might be the greatest technical difficulty in the history of the show.
You have to just put a beep over it. A long beep. But that is the only thing going on in the news that is trackable and interesting. And that's what I like to cover as news, not just like this week's stuff, but the things that are going on generally. I like to track week over week certain developments. And I'll tell you, this is where we can probably lay the hook is it doesn't seem like anything that's happening is trackable over weeks. Not just because it wraps up, but there's no continuing storyline. So, for instance, in the old administration, you could have a story about Joe Biden, triple chocolate chip ice cream. And if you didn't get to that within a few days, it was stale and nobody thought it was funny. But Biden gave us numerous opportunities to track his ice cream habits over 4 years. So if you missed it 1 week, no doubt the following week, he was licking another ice cream and you'd be able to talk about it. And it was probably also funny. And the issue with Donald Trump is, and I don't actually think this administration is particularly competent, but it seems to be very competent in making it so that there's no long-term trackable storylines of any given interest. We got a huge beatdown of Zelensky in the White House just a few days ago, a huge beatdown. That would have in a previous administration been ripe for continuum, meaning they're going to meet again. They're world leaders. They're going to meet again. They should pummel him again. And we haven't gotten that. And in the previous administration, we would have gotten another version of the thing that we liked to track. It's easier for podcasters to do it this way. So it's very difficult, I think, in this administration. And that would be my first point is there's a lack of iteration on concepts going on. Everything is totally novel, which makes everything very hard to tie into a larger story, which makes narrative tellers and podcasters like you and I, true newsmen, very difficult to weave a news story together over the weeks that keeps people interested. Does that make sense as reason one?
Oh, 100%. And I think there's another contributing factor, which is effectively, we're sort of in the situation of, the dog who caught the car, right? Which is effectively, like there've been like 10 different things happening that were on everyone's wish list, right? Like blowing up foreign aid, yelling at
borders closed.
Firing a bunch of federal workers. But they're almost happening so quickly and with so little follow-up that there's almost nothing to say about it. It's like, well, this happened. Who knows? And after like the 4th month of saying that, there's just not much more to say. And you really have to transition to either what I've been doing, which is making everyone angry by talking about theology constantly, or track the real news, which is effectively animal stories, Elon Musk's sex life, and random hood occurrences.
Well, that is where I think we are. This will lead actually to my second observation about why the news is tough for newsmen right now, which relates to what you're saying. My second contention is there is a general air, and I already alluded to this, of TDS, Trump Depression Syndrome. So a few months back, we had the high of highs. We did it. We won. Things were happening again. Our boys in office, they're rolling everything back from the previous administration, and we are gonna kill everyone. And that's what the mindset was, a few months ago. And what some of us realized, what others always felt wasn't true, all intersecting at one point is the question, what happens next? Just like the dog meeting the car, I guess the dog can do a lot of things when he finally gets to the car. He can pee on it, he can bite it, he can hump it, he can jump on it, he can get into it. A dog has a lot of options when he finally catches the car, but the big problem is when the dog is running towards the car, his conception of the options that he will be presented with are far, far greater than what actually is the reality that the dog confronts when the car is parked and he's next to it. A dog chasing a car thinks, when I get to that car, I'm going to rip it apart with my bare teeth. I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to eat it. I'm going to poop it out. And then I'm going to find another car and I'm going to do the same thing again. In reality, the dog looks at the car and goes, this is made of metal. It's kind of hard to puncture. And I guess I could get on top of it, but I might slip. And I guess I could kind of wedge my head into the tailpipe. But there's nothing really fun to do when you're finally here. Even though you got what you wanted, you got the car, it's in your hands, you could slowly destroy it, but you just don't have the jaw strength to rip the thing apart in quite the means that you wanted to. And that to me is the pinnacle analogy for where we are at as newsmen, not just as a country, but as newsmen. We're presented with all of the options that we've been chasing over and over. And what we're realizing is if you want to fix America's economy by using tariffs and trade war, even if that does work, which many are skeptical it will not, it's going to take a long time. AKA, there's nothing to talk about at this point right now. Or you could have another situation where Donald Trump has closed the border, but there are 750 million illegals in America, and they are not being removed at one time. So there's nothing really to talk about. We got the fentanyl dealer lady and the Studio Ghibli thing. That was hilarious. But guess what? That happened on a Thursday, and my show comes out on a Wednesday. So by the time that wrapped up, there was nothing left to discuss.
Well, really, I think that Trump is really missing the most vital part of the economy, which is racist podcasters, right? His strongest source of support and a pillar of the American economy. And focusing on something lame and boring like American manufacturing or whiny blue-collar workers at the expense of podcasters is a huge misstep. Really, what I'm saying is free trade for everything except for podcasters, and we should be subsidized. So if you're a lineman,
I agree.
You're a truck driver crying about your quote unquote real job. Well, guess what? I don't care.
We don't even have real jobs.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I will piggyback off of what you have said here. My piggyback on what you have said here is, in a sense, I have to agree. My co-hosts on TLE have said for a long time, both Paz and Aaron have said for a long time, where is my money? Joe Biden promised us $700. Donald Trump promised us $1,200. Elon Musk promised us $5,000, some crazy amount of money we were promised, and we haven't gotten it. Now, me talking about money is just a metaphor for what I really mean, which is pork. We need some kind of deliverable. It is inarguable. Of course, it is Elon Musk who purchased.
You still there? What the heck?
Am I back?
Yeah.
I guess I'm having some kind of Florida-based internet issue.
I don't think it's on my end. I got like 600
oh my God.
Megabytes per second. My internet's solid. Again,
insane.
These are the kind of things you have when you have a real job, right?
I'm struggling.
America.
I'm struggling to keep my vibe here. I'm struggling.
I know.
Oh my God.
You just said something about Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Okay, yes. So he bought Twitter, but we won Twitter. Okay, he bought Twitter, but we are the ones who did the legwork, right? I only have 7,000 followers, so I'm under no illusions that I played an only small role in changing the tone and the culture of that platform. But I still did, you still did, all of us still did as a team effort, because even the people with 40,000 followers, 50,000 followers, they're all gracious and they look at even smaller accounts like us and being like, if I couldn't post for someone, there's no reason to post. So it's an ecosystem that we're all a part of. We won X, the right wing online won X, and by extension won the election. We won the election for Donald Trump. And it is unfortunately all too common a trend in politics generally, and including with Trump's politics, that it seems like the people who really won it for him, he just counts us as on board. And I mean, for the most part, we are just on board. But I mean, every once in a while, you got to throw us, I don't know, SWAT breaks up drag queen story hour, or, I mean, we need something, because how am I going to talk about dire wolves for the 12th time in a given day? I just don't care. We don't care anymore.
To quote a great philosopher, is we getting another stimulus check? It's basically my point. I mean, look, this is the lack of like substantive chum for the water, right? Is really been something, and especially when you consider that, like, look, like I like anime versions of fentanyl dealers being deported as much as the next guy.
Of course.
But, you know, I want to see some actual I'm struggling for a YouTube appropriate word here. I want to see some
you want to see action.
Consequences. Yeah. and funny enough, I actually noticed this in like the hardcore MAGA base too, that those people are getting pretty pissed off about all of this, you know, breaking fraud investigation or whatever, where of course it is revealed that the entire US government is a giant shell game committed to doing absolutely nothing and raking in money. And, you know, despite being fired, none of these people are actually meaningfully held to account. You know, it just seems like, okay, well, we fired another 13,000 redundant federal bureaucrats. The end. And look, like, I'm not going to lie. I do certainly enjoy the economic suffering of my enemies. It'd be nice if there was some kind of like C-SPAN where we could just see like, you know, DMV ladies crying or something. You know, that would be helpful. Just kind of a, you know, 24/7 stream of human suffering would be helpful. But it does sort of feel like, I mean, to your point earlier, that these things just happen and there is nothing afterwards, right? It's just kind of statements. And look, like, I know that these things are happening because you can read the kind of legacy press freaking out about it briefly. But, you know, minus that touch point, you could be forgiven for assuming all of this just wasn't happening and was just completely
absolutely
made up.
Well, and I mean, I don't know, this number gets pushed around a lot and it sounds real, but I don't know if it is. But what is it? Something like 80% of Americans like barely have any contact with the stock market or something. People have finally realized the number can go down by trillions of dollars, and it means nothing. In the past, if the number went down by trillions of dollars, you'd have to eat your horse. Now there is just there's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. That's part of the thing about the fiat system. As long as people believe hard enough, we're kind of stuck. Like it's a brilliant system based entirely on how much we still believe. And you can make normies believe for a really, really long time.
Well, this is a relevant point. You mentioned eating a horse. What is the modern man's version of eating their horse? You know, like what does the average Reddit type individual, to bring that phrase back, what do? Do they eat their cat? Right? Do they have to go to r/chonkers and say, I ate my 38-pound house cat?
I think in order to really understand the kind of situation we're in, we have to take a serious look at eating your horse and really apply the entire ecosystem of change to it. So is it even the case that if the economy collapses in 2025, people won't be able to eat anymore? I'm not even sure that that's the case. What would actually happen if everything fell apart? Because you wouldn't have to kill your cat and eat your cat. You would have to pay for X. Like, I don't really like to get on. Like, what is the real? That's the thing, is there's almost no consequences, but there's almost no progress.
Well, and there's another, to kind of put on my my RFK hat here. There's the other point that would mass starvation be a bad thing, right? Like maybe a little bit of the like the post-war German experience would do the average American some good. You know, burn through.
I don't even disagree. I don't even disagree. I think it's you're very, very much right that a little challenge might be good for us.
Well, and this is funny because like 3 months ago, I was like, wow, those accelerationists, what cringe LARPers. And then like 3 months of boring news. And I'm like, yeah, light it all on fire. I got to have something to talk about.
Yeah. Well, this brings me to my third point, and at this point I've lost what the thesis was, but I'm going to keep listing points until they come together to make a cohesive statement. My third point is we have been presented in 2025 with a very difficult situation because it has turned out that winning means we as podcasters are losing. In other words, it turns out that time preference is inverse to the amount of entertainment that we are able to give out on this show. So when there are austerity measures being taken, or when there is a plan in place to make things harder on Americans for payoff in the long run, there's just nothing fun to talk about. Another thing that loops into this, when we're winning and getting what we want, it's not much to talk about. That falls back into the second principle of the dog chasing the car and not knowing what to do with it. Finally, and the most difficult point of all, this is what I'm really afraid of. It can get so much worse. Now, you and I, as podcasters, this is what we love to do. We love to talk to one another, knowing other people are listening. Then we love to watch people's responses, engage with the people. We love to be on the lookout for things to talk about. We are the chatty Cathys of the right wing, and everybody loves us for it. They enjoy that we fill their ears with things to think about and listen to while they're doing their job or while they're at home hanging out. They love it, and we love them. So the job itself is not at detriment, but security is at detriment, because for 4 years under Biden, and I mean this sincerely, here's a look behind the curtain to those who've listened to my show. Everybody knows that I keep a Notion document. I talk about this crazy Notion document of every episode of TLE that I've done with the news on it. It's what I use to read on the episode. What I used to be able to do in the Biden administration was, this is breaking kayfabe, we record on Monday nights or sometimes Tuesdays, and we release it on Wednesday at noon. And we like to joke that we release it live on Wednesday at noon, just to give a little, just to make everybody feel like they're right there with us. But we've been really doing this 1 or 2 days beforehand. But to give you an idea, the way that I would curate news for those episodes in the Biden administration is that I would log onto my computer at 4:25 p.m. on a Monday, and I would begin looking for news that happened in the past week, and we could fill an hour and a half talking about what happened. Now, I have noticed in the Trump administration, I have to be looking at the timeline every single day of the week, collecting 1 or 2 things to talk about every single day. And my longtime listeners will know and freely admit, and I'm not afraid to admit it because they'll stick with me, we have been barely sneaking by with much more effort put into looking for news. We've been barely hitting the 1 hour mark, which is like our gold standard, barely hitting the 1 hour mark, joking on the episode about how it would be really good for us to spend 10 to 12 minutes just listening to a prog rock song so that we could buy time in the middle of the episode. This is point number 3. When we're winning, we're losing. That's not a general statement about the case, going on in the United States generally. It's about the news. When we're actually getting what we want, there's really nothing to talk about. So this is this is what it implies, that whole thing. It implies that if the news is going to be this way, this is not a sustainable model for us. So we need to branch out. And we need to start talking about weirder topics, less pleasant topics, topics outside of the norm. We've been trying to do this on my Patreon. Over the line, we're covering ancient conspiracy theories on my Patreon, me and Paz. There is a lot to dig into, but it really requires a whole new look at what actually are you going to be a chatty Cathy about? What are you going to entertain the people with? Because if your whole thing is talking politics and talking about the left wing and what they've done badly lately and how great the right wing, if you're like standard right-wing podcaster guy like we were for years in the Biden administration, that's what we love to cover. You've got to quickly change, or you're going to start seeing what happened to the blood sport generation of podcasters and YouTubers. Eventually, it all just kind of went away slowly. Nobody watches those guys anymore. I mean, they still have huge audiences. I'm just saying the peak has long passed. And that is the concern, is that the peak for this new thing that I like to do, political and news-based podcasting and commentary, nothing to talk about. It's dry. So you better start talking about cryptids, or you better start talking about weird criminals, stuff like that. You're going to find a lot of ground in. But yeah, I'm very, very skeptical that the way things have been can keep going.
So point number 5, the snake, right? Kind of rounding out the Chinese zodiac here.
Sure.
With that has come the birth of, or not the birth, I guess, like the solidification of like the slop grifter, right? Which is, as certain of our ideas have become mainstreamed, they've become profitable. And to complain again about Elon Musk, by buying and then monetizing Twitter, he has enabled these just bottom feeding slop accounts to just rake in money, which of course creates imitators. And so now you have, this kind of endless cycle of the same stories, the same memes, just derivatively posted effectively by Indians. And look, I know there's been certain measures to correct that, right? Like adjusting X payouts based off of your country's cost of living. But still, right? It's not just them. There's a number of these kind of like execrable figures who just repeat the same talking points over and over again for money. And It's created an immense amount of fatigue, even to just talking about politics in general. It's like, you're doing it. Now it's not cool anymore. So let's talk about something else.
Exactly what it is, man. That's exactly right. It's a real challenge. I mean, let me ask you, have you noticed this particular struggle? And if you have, where have you been branching?
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, I think that there's two things, right? Which is one, all joking aside, if you're doing a podcast you don't want to be on, it produces bad content. And so if you're so married to like the here and now news and you don't want to talk about it, I mean, that's just miserable, right? I think I have an advantage because, I mean, my format is not heavily news based. Of course I talk about current events, but a lot of times it's just like, all right, who's on my Rolodex of interesting people to talk to? And so it's like, I can have Thomas on and we can talk about, like, I don't know, serial killers or 1950s sci-fi. And that's cool.
Yeah.
But it's
and
like,
that's a gold mine.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's nothing like that. It doesn't matter if that came out 3 years ago. It would be the same conversation, right?
Yeah. Can I briefly interrupt you before you continue?
Yeah, sure.
From the kind of the difference in matter is that with news, it's about what's relevant, and with weird stuff, it's about whether or not your audience has heard it before. So it's two different challenges.
Oh, well, I mean, look, like History Channel learned about this decades ago, right? Like they'd make new documentaries on the same like 3 unexplained events with like a rotating cast of like UFO experts. And I mean, they rode that train for 2 decades. Like how many documentaries are there about like aliens building the pyramids or like, I don't know, Hitler escaping to Mars or something? You know what I mean? Like that's a well-established business model. And look, like, I think the other thing too is like, we've been on just culturally like a 8-year bender on hyper-partisan politics, from really like 20 or from like, I want to say like 2023 to 2016, 2015, right about that range. Cause even like during the end of Biden, like it was kind of done. Like no one really cared to the same degree. But I think that there's just been a natural fallout to that, right? Which is like, look, like if you've been running at like 130% for a decade, there's going to be a fallout from that. And I think that, I hate to say it, as an incredibly selfish man who wants nothing more than personal financial gain, it's probably a good thing for human life that politics are kind of receding into the background because people went kind of nuts. Like, do you ever have these stories that it seems like you were the only person in the world who remembers them that are just completely bonkers?
Of course. That's my gig.
Like, do you remember when I think it was Oregon or Washington, their Department of Health during COVID issued a memorandum that basically said, don't get COVID while having sex. So just cut a hole in a shower curtain and make like your like hook up glory hole. And it had like this like horrible like corporate Memphis infographic that went alongside it. And that's one of those things where it's like, that's absurd, right? That's grotesque. But that was weird even then, but not that weird. Right. There was like crazy, like off the wall stuff happening all the time. And people were very, very worked up about it. And look, like, I don't believe in democracy. I don't think most people should be involved in politics. And the fact that effectively all of American culture and by extension, the world's culture got wrapped up in like culture war bullshit was probably not a good thing.
Well, and also the left is really boring.
Oh,
if you kind of step back, the reason why it was a golden age, even up to 2 years ago, as the kind of podcasters we are, again, it's hard to put a label on it, but the kind of podcasters that we are, there was a golden age like 2 years ago, and it was propelled by how goofy the left was. But when you really get down to it, they were goofy in that stage because they were deranged. And now that, I mean, at least I am in agreement with the crowd that says the woke is pretty much over. It no longer has a useful purpose. So it's been essentially put away, at least from my perspective, since I believe that. That implies that the left has kind of had to go normal. And you're really seeing, I wouldn't call it normal because there is a huge amount of Trump derangement, but it was never interesting to talk about how vital Ukraine is. And it was never really interesting to talk about Palestine. And it was never really interesting to talk about all these issues that the left has always cared about, these kinds of subjects. It was always funny and interesting to talk about, I don't know, Drag Queen Pickle Night. If you remember Drag Queen Pickle Night, do you remember that one?
Not only do I not remember that, but that combination of words produces no image in my brain whatsoever.
Drag Queen Pickle Night. It was an Austin bar held a drag queen pickle. I don't even know if I talked about this on TLE. And that's the problem is I'm a curator of these weird stories, and a lot of them are set in stone because we've done them on TLE, so you can just go back and listen. But there's a lot of stories that we just don't get to, or that I just pass up on, or there were a lot of stories. I could never say that today. And one of them, I believe it was Drag Queen Pickle Night. And I don't know if I'm even calling it by the right name, so you may not even be able to search it that way. But the gimmick was, it was a bunch of it was an Austin bar in that old area of Austin that's like, pretend cattle town. And it was Drag Queen Pickle Night. They invited all the drag queens. I think there were even some quote unquote famous drag queens at the event. And it was bobbing for apples, but pickles. And there was a whole extensive tracking of the standings and who was winning and how long the pickles were. And you would get points not only for bobbing for pickles, but the longer the pickle was, you'd get more points if you could bob for it. There might have been a zero crunch pickle eating contest, if you know what I mean, just shoving it down there. There was a lot going on there. And as you have demonstrated, nobody even remembers Drag Queen Pickle Night happened.
Well, see, have we just arrived at the uncomfortable conclusion that far from being the bedrock of the American economy, we provide a completely useless service. we do nothing for nothing. That it is all simply just kind of like combining different like words, like it's Mad Libs, to create an outrage reaction.
Yeah, you're so right that Drag Queen Pickle Night may not have even happened. It may have been a single viral tweet that was then deleted in order to just to do psychological damage to people. Very possible. But I mean, you can do a lot with that kind of stuff. I mean, we just spent 3 minutes talking about it on my show. That's like 5% of the whole show right there, eaten and just done.
Well,
You know,
see, here's what you got to do. You've just got to become more dedicated to disinformation. Because really, I think the problem is you have been depending on actual events that happen. Whereas if you just make events up, right? If you just talk about things that you thought of, well, I mean, look, like that's a great opportunity. I mean, we all joke about being, misinformation, right? But why not buy into it, right? Just lie.
Just like, well, that used so before TLE really took off and we became so TLE has existed for longer than the news has existed. TLE has the joke was that TLE was the podcast, my podcast. And before that, it was, I guess I can't say it because it's YouTube. It was an acronym that rhymes with bag. Cast, and that went because it was Friends Against Government. This was back in our libertarian anarchist days.
It was a British context. It was all about smoking.
Yes,
right? So
cigarettes.
you can say it was a fag cast, right?
Yes, there you go. Right, a cigarette-based podcast, and on that show we would just talk cryptids and have fun time. It was like very peak libertarian anarchist era, like the kinds of things those silly folks liked to talk about. We loved to talk about cryptids in particular. Then we evolved to TLE, and we really evolved to TLE because we had to get rid of the name because popular people wouldn't come on the show because of that, because they wouldn't come on. So we had to change the name, and with the change of the name, we also realized we don't actually want to have guests. So big whoop. I guess that's over now. But what we did eventually, before we became the news, which this is all really inside baseball for some of you, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to be quick. We had an internal segment on TLE called TLE Nation, where we would play a different intro bumper and outro bumper, and it would be a podcast inside the podcast about the news. That eventually became so popular that the whole show became about news. But there was a golden age between the end of our first podcast, the beginning of TLE, and the start of the news. Just between the start of the news and the first podcast in this golden TLE era where we would, for half of the episode, just make stuff up. I mean, you go back to some of these earlier episodes and I am telling lies. Like we're talking about things that just aren't real, didn't happen. And the whole audience knew that because multiple times per episode, we would joke about how we were making things up. And that really was a total golden age that now that the news has ended, I'm really trying to capture the spirit to go back to and reiterate on, because it is a brilliant thing to just get up, do an hour talking about stuff that's fake, like just making things up, not improv exactly, but you're adding little bits of fake elements to real situations, real reporting, real news. It requires more skill. And this is, Mr. Burden, I think what is relevant to both of us, the age of podcasting that we're now entering, where we seek to both entertain and inform our listeners, as well as to curate and to establish community. We are now going to be tested because this is like, I don't know if you were around for it, but many of your listeners probably were, the death of the libertarian podcast era. I believe it happened 2015, 2016, where there were thousands of podcasts about guys who would tell you about the non-aggression principle and the Mises article that you need to read. There were thousands of these podcasts, and slowly they started to change their vibe, or they would go out of business. It would change. And it was entirely based on what people wanted to consume at the time. Here's my question to you, Mr. Burden. From guys like us, what do they want to consume? I'm having trouble placing it.
Well, so several things. One, I know the archetype of the failed libertarian podcaster quite well. Actually, one of my friends had failed libertarian podcast.
I just be
Scrumped
clear.
the internet.
I'm not saying that to insult anyone.
I am.
And I also view myself as a failed libertarian podcast because our libertarian podcast ended. It had to end. Like, it literally had to end because we couldn't figure out how to carry it on the same way. And we had to reiterate. So just to clarify, I'm not knocking anybody. It was, it was a genocidal event, 2016.
So several things. One, I just want to seed the ground here by saying, one, if the J.Burden show fails, it was due to market conditions outside of my control. And alternately, if it succeeds, I am a genius, just an absolute titan among
Well, that's
men.
the art of the deal. That's the art of the deal.
And secondarily, I sort of object to your core premise because I think that the problem of slop is caring about what your audience wants. Because you need to have a certain amount of disdain. And if you're simply reactive, if you listen to the peons, to the peasants, to the quote unquote blue collar workers with real jobs, you'll just be making slop, right? You have to treat those people with the disdain, with the disrespect that they deserve. God has put them in a lowly position in relation to the podcaster, right? The true A10 man who will create a new reality. Sorry, Bird.
This is how I used to be. And you can hear it live on TLE. I would say it to the audience live. I don't like you. I don't care what you want to listen to. We used to really rag on the audience hard, and they used to really rag on me back. But as I've matured, and Jay, I'm currently 28 years old, so you have about 18 years to get up to where I am. So it's going to take you a while, but where I'm at now is I have a healthy distance between myself and the listeners, and I know what to predict and expect from them. But where I've evolved is I used to feel exactly like you. Now imagine that you felt that way, except you wanted them to be better, right? So there's just there's a little elitist that, like, okay, they are an evil mass who torments me. Anytime I look online, they torment me. But what if I could make them effective? I can't say it for YouTube. Effective freedom fighters or something that would be very useful to me in the future. And that's where I'm at. So do you see what I mean? You may not care about what the audience wants, but you do want to shape where they're going.
So what you're saying is you're effectively expressing the newsman's burden, right? You need to reform these savages into productive members of society, like a Cecil Rhodes of podcasting.
The best podcasters. Then that's a good reference because it is really that way. The best podcasters in our space, outside of our space, they won't tell the audience that they're doing that, even though that's also what they're doing. That's the next stage that I need to get to, is stop telling the listeners that I'm trying to change their mind and just do it. Stop telling the listeners that I'm trying to get them to go a certain way and just do it. We're moving from influencers to controllers. We're creating little cults. And that's the next stage of podcasting, essentially, is you create a niche cult for yourself and your close friends.
And then you aggressively monetize it, harvest their money, and then move on, right? Having discarded
that's patchwork. I believe that's how Yarvin's patchwork really is supposed to work.
Well, we'll see. Interesting question. If you could, right, but paint us a before and after, right, of the unreformed audience member, and then a newly minted TLE Taliban member, if you could.
Well, so it used to be the case that we would get listeners who had something to say. So and I'm sure you've had this. Plenty of listeners have something to say, and so you're getting a listener who's engaging with the content, but who's arguing with the content. What you want to do is, in the old TLE days, we had audience members who didn't accept what we were giving them. So there were weak over week, there would be a riot online if the episode was 10 minutes late or 5 minutes late, or if we missed our migratory bird tracking segment. For those of you who don't listen to my show, this must be very confusing for you. But yeah, we had a migratory birds tracking segment where we would cover one migratory bird each week. And if that didn't make the air, we would have riots. You would think we didn't put an episode out. You would think we said we canceled the show on that episode that they're writing about. But it was really just from missing a bit. Our listeners had very high expectations, and I would argue very limited response to what we actually did put out when we did something right. What you want to do if you're a news podcaster, as you anticipate the change that's coming, and so the change in the content that you're making, your listeners are going to start revolting because they have expectations of you. What you want to do is, now Burden will tell you, screw them. It doesn't matter what they want. I'm going to do what I think is interesting. And Burden's not wrong. But how I would say it is, you do have to do what you want. But at the same time, if the listeners are making something harder for you, then you have to make it easier for them. So we are now entering this phase where we actually canceled. I'm sure you heard, Jay, we've canceled TLE Nation. We are not covering the news anymore. Our podcast is now a not news related podcast. Here was the problem. The listeners who I expected to rebel, all of them, I think 100% of the listeners are ready for the change, which I was amazed by because TLE Nation was so popular. People talk about the news all the time. We made this announcement. It's over. We're not doing the news anymore. We're going to do different things on the show. I hadn't gotten one negative comment from any of the listeners. They were all supportive. They were all like, yeah, we got to get out of here. That led me to believe that no matter how much back and forth or independent artistry that you have on your podcast, when it comes to making your listeners the kind of listeners that you want, what really matters is that you seize the tide. You have to seize the opportunity, because our new shows, like what's going on Patreon, this stuff is more popular than ever. We've had like episodes from old timers who've been very negative on how the show's been going for the past few years are like, oh my God, it's back. New listeners are coming and flooding in. And it's only because I think by getting rid of the news, we actually did do the listeners a favor. They don't really care about the news anymore.
So what you're saying is you followed through to the logical conclusion of your idea that the news should be illegal. And so you've decided to take the first step yourself and just stop talking about it.
Well, and all I had to do was wait for the environmental conditions to make it so that my audience couldn't disagree. This is a big thing, and we call it luck, but it could also be called physics. When you're dealing with running a show and negotiating with the audience, the environment is playing a role on what they want to hear. And if they have been so beaten down by the news in the way that you and I, Jay, have talked about now for an hour, they will accept whatever change you give to them. These are the consequences of, this is how the psychoanalytic tradition took off in Europe. Europe was so psychically beaten down that they pretty much took whatever kind of magicianry they were presented with that still has no explanation to this day. That's what happened to the listeners. So you asked me, how do you go from barbarians to civilized freedom fighters? Well, sometimes you just have to wait. Sometimes you just have to wait for the plane to hit the towers, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you just have to wait for the environment to give you the signal to go ahead.
Well, that's actually a very prescient point, because I've oftentimes in my own self-delusions referred to myself as the Sigmund Freud of podcasters, right? Entering in a new
I've
era
heard that.
of complete gobbledygook. And so I would like to announce, if you want to pay me hundreds of dollars an hour to listen to your problems and make up some random bullshit, I'm available. There's a link in the description. Pay me money or else. I think, and that's a threat, I should say, an actionable legal threat. So, Bird, we're past approaching time. If people want to find you, where should they look?
Well, first of all, I want to thank your whole audience for listening to my spiel. I like to get the opportunity to talk about what the culture is like and what's going on. And it's fun from a podcaster's perspective to tell you about like what my side of the culture looks like. And so it's a lot of fun to do it. If you want to hear more, search Timeline Earth on any RSS catcher, any pod catcher that you can find, and you'll get us there. Our latest episode we always put out on Wednesday. It's coming out same day as this, so go over there and listen to it. I would also really encourage any of your listeners to check out the Patreon. For the price of a slice of pizza, you get behind the paywall hundreds of episodes, both old and new, coming out every week. And me and my co-host Paz, we're doing a new series covering Bill Cooper, the legendary Bill Cooper's Mystery Babylon conspiracy theory, which essentially documents the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other Babylonian religious practitioners, how they infiltrated the government, and what their plan to instantiate the New World Order is. It was filmed or was recorded in the early 90s before Bill was killed by the FBI for reasons confusing. And it's a very interesting thing to listen to and commentate on. So I think people would like that. It's been the most popular thing we've done in a long time. And I think you'll like it if you go over there.
That was sort of an interesting Freudian slip there, Bird. I don't know why pizza was the first thing that came to your mind when discussing units of currency.
Because, you know why? Because someone once said, if I hear another podcaster beg for money and say, for the price of a cup of coffee, and it made me feel so bad that somebody noticed that that's a thing that I do. So then I changed it to pizza because pizza is about the same price. Also, I love pizza and am Italian.
For the price of a brief stay in the neonatal unit, you can support a podcaster for weeks at a time.
A very brief stay.
That should be a new bit, right? Just coming up with more exotic ways to determine like small units of value.
To beg for $4.20. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, I really appreciate it. This was a fun conversation. It really, for us, if nothing else, because this was basically just a conversation about being a news podcaster, right?
Yes, yeah.
Which no value to anyone
else. People like it.
Well, again, I appreciate it. As far as my stuff, J.Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to support us, bear my threat in mind. You can either do that with the links down in the description, crypto, anything you want, or by checking out our sponsors, Axios Remote Fitness and Coaching, and North Appalachian Supply, who I believe has actually sponsored some of Paz's work as well, if I'm not mistaken. So check those out. Yeah, look at that. Some synergy. Again, Bird, I appreciate it. And everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.